Welcome to the Infowars Nightly News. It's Monday, July 1st, 2013, and here are our top stories.
Tonight on the Infowars Nightly News, Russian forces are set to provide security at U.S. events. Then forget about the blue gloves, prepare to be groped by the wet noses. And more on how NSA's PRISM system puts you in a database prison. All that and more coming up on the Infowars Nightly News.
G.I. Joe Command Base is run by Cobra.
Well, we've seen our police militarized. We've seen our military being used as police. Now, in a breaking story from Paul Joseph Watson on Infowars, we see that the Russian forces are going to provide security at U.S. events. In the article on Infowars, it says, as part of the deal signed last week in Washington, D.C. between the Russian Emergency Situations Ministry and FEMA, Russian officials will provide security at mass events in the United States, a scenario that won't sit well with Americans who are wary of foreign assets operating on U.S. soil. The use of foreign troops or other officials in a law enforcement capacity providing, quote, security inside the United States is illegal under Posse Comitatus. Now, this is something that we've seen happen before in empires, of course. The Romans were famous for doing this, and the British did it to a large degree during the British Empire. And that is taking troops that are not native to a particular area or taking competing ethnic groups and using one ethnic group that's had a conflict with a second ethnic group in the past, using that group to police that ethnic group and vice versa. It'll be a lot easier for our government to collect guns and confiscate guns and shoot on Americans if they're not using American soldiers, if they're using Russian soldiers. But of course, even using the American military to do that is against the Constitution. But it'll just be a matter of effectiveness for them to do that. Now, this is something that's been happening for quite some time. As the article points out, going all the way back to 1961, we have a leaked document, the State Department publication 7277. In that document, it talked about U.S. troops and Russian troops joining together to create a peaceful disarmament under the UN. Then we also had the urban warfare drills of the 1990s, reported by Alex Jones multiple times in the news and documentaries. In 2008, we saw the U.S. and Canada have a joint military agreement to help each other out during quote-unquote emergencies. And in 2010, we had Operation Vigilant Guard with Polish troops. And then, of course, last year we had Russians doing policing work in Colorado Springs. Now, this all came from a Russian publication. This is where Paul Joseph Watson found it. And that's referenced in the article, so you can read it for yourself. We're not making this up. A very dangerous precedent, something we're increasingly seeing. As I said, it goes back to 1961. But the frequency at which it's happening, the openness with which it's happening is what is really concerning, as well as these increasing frequencies of urban warfare drills. Now, there's been a change in TSA at the Denver airport. And you may wonder if it's any better to get sniffed by a dog than handled by a TSA agent. But some people seem to think that that's an improvement. In a report from CBS Denver, it says a major change is coming to the security lines at DIA. And there's a couple of quotes that are from tweets that are in there. Through airport security without taking my shoes off, removing anything from my bag, or being scanned. That person's so happy that happened. Another person tweeted and said, straight through security in just 2 minutes with shoes on and laptops and liquids in a bag. And finally, the article points out the TSA's website says its canine teams are a mobile form of explosive detection and are extremely accurate. Isn't it sad that people are so excited that they can pass through and only have a dog sniff them instead of a person manhandling them, fondling them? Can't you remember when you were able to travel with freedom and dignity in this country? It wasn't that long ago. And you didn't have to get excited about the fact that you were merely smelled by a dog. But the thing that's also troubling about this is the emphasis on efficiency. You know, it was said that Hitler made the trains run on time, but maybe the destination of Auschwitz is not where you want to head. And we have seen historically that the TSA is not really doing anything. At least maybe these dogs can certainly sniff explosives or remnants of explosives on people's clothing. You know, dogs are used for arson control. They'll be able to smell accelerants on people's clothing who had just handled that stuff in the past. And so I'm sure that's what they're looking for. That's why they don't have to go through your bags. And it would be a more effective way to do it. But is there really a threat? We have seen for a decade the TSA using increasingly intrusive, unconstitutional techniques to control us, to monitor us, to harass us. And yet they haven't found anything. As a matter of fact, when they conduct their own internal tests, their failure rate is so high that the Florida congressman who introduced the legislation to create the TSA said he wanted it disbanded. But of course, he was blocked from releasing their failure rate because it was too incriminating. Now, if we really had the kind of terrorist threat that we're supposed to have, we would have seen a lot of terrorist attacks because the TSA is absolutely ineffective. But instead, what they're going to do is they're going to find other ways to harass us, if not with two-legged animals, then with four-legged animals. And we see another thing that's repeated here. We have another American stuck abroad on a no-fly list. This is from USA Today, and it says a no-fly list is blamed as a U.S. flyer is stranded in Bangkok airport. Now, this fellow is of Pakistani family, but he grew up in America. His name is Mutawalla, and he's a 29-year-old U.S. citizen from Pomona, California, on his way to Indonesia, from Indonesia to L.A., when airline staff in Bangkok refused to issue him a boarding pass for his connecting flight. U.S. and Thai authorities told them that he could not travel, but they would not say why. This is what we constantly see with these no-fly lists, leading him to believe that he'd been placed on the U.S. government's secret no-fly list. You know, there's never any trial, there's never any accusation, you're never told why you're put on it. It's just a star chamber proceeding. Continuing in the article, it says, after sleeping at the airport terminal for 4 nights he had to sleep in the terminal, Mutawalla, who is of Pakistani descent, was told that a Justice Department official had arrived from the U.S. to question him. When he declined to answer questions without a lawyer present, hey, this guy is an American who knows his rights. He was left in the custody of Thai authorities who held him in a detention center for 10 days. He said, they treat you like an animal. And he pointed out he was born in Anaheim 29 years ago. Now, the group that is fighting this says that, civil rights group says that cases like his show that the government has failed to carry out a 2010 policy to bring American citizens and permanent residents stuck overseas back to the U.S. regardless of their no-fly status. Now, a lot of people are going to say, well, he is Pakistani origin, so I'm sure there was some kind of suspicious thing going on there. Well, if you remember, it was back in October that Wade Hicks was stranded in Hawaii on his way to Japan to see his wife, who was in the military. Now, Wade is not of Pakistani origin. He doesn't have any kind of foreign connection in his background. I mean, he's just kind of a white Anglo-Saxon Protestant kind of guy. He was also cleared recently, just before he left, by the FBI for the highest level of concealed carry, and he had been cleared by the TSA as a worker, as a transportation worker. He had a special badge for that. In spite of all that, and without any notification, he was drug off of a plane and stranded in Hawaii. And he was eventually able to get back to the States, but they would never tell him if he was on the list. They wouldn't tell him why he got put on the list. They wouldn't tell him if he was still on the list or if he could ever fly again. And this is the kind of star chamber secret proceedings that we see the government doing in every aspect of their activities in the name of war on terror, whether it is NSA spying on people, the FISA court, which operates in secret, or whether it's these secret no-fly lists. Now, if you think that background checks for guns are bad, and they are because of what they're going to do with it, how about a background check for your job? How about if the government had to okay your new job, or had to know where you're working and when you're changing jobs? Well, that's exactly what is being proposed as part of this immigration bill. In order to save us from illegal immigration, they won't close the borders, they won't police the borders. Instead, what they're going to do is enact draconian measures on people who live in the United States, citizens who are in the United States. And part of this is E-Verify. And there was an article on Infowars today from Ron Paul. He said, if you'd like the surveillance state, you're going to love E-Verify. He said the mandatory E-Verify system requires Americans to carry a tamper-proof Social Security card. The law gives federal bureaucrats broad discretion in adding other biometric identifiers to the database. It also gives the bureaucracy broad authority to determine what features the tamper-proof card should contain. And he points out the day may come when you're not able to board an airplane or exercise your Second Amendment rights without being run through the E-Verify database. It's not outside the realm of possibility that personal health care information that will soon be collected by the IRS and shared with other federal agencies as part of Obamacare will also be linked to E-Verify systems. It's interesting, as we saw with Bilderberg. Well, as the surveillance state grows, the government believes that it needs to know every single aspect of your life. No detail, no matter how minute, is hidden from their view. But of course, we're not allowed to know anything about our masters. A good example of this is Obama's birth certificate. And we're going to be talking in our interview today with Mike Zullo. He's going to be talking about the detailed investigation into Obama's background and his birth certificate by Sheriff Arpaio's group. Now, you may think that E-Verify is something that isn't going to happen if the immigration bill doesn't pass. It has passed in the Senate. It looks like it will be blocked in the House, but actually it is already going into effect as of today in North Carolina and Georgia. Employers in North Carolina with 25 or more employees and in Georgia with 10 or more are now required to use E-Verify as of today, July 1st, 2013. Department of Homeland Security has been phasing it in without any legislative authority. Now, in North Carolina, they've been doing this going back to October of 2012. They put it in for employers with over 500 employees. Then in January, they reduced it to 100. Now today, July 1st, they take it down to 25 or more employees. Georgia started phasing this in back in January of 2012, and now, as of today, they are down to companies that only have 10 employees are required to send this information to Department of Homeland Security and the Social Security Administration whenever someone hires someone new. It has to be verified by the Department of Homeland Security. Now, what's really troubling about this, it would be bad enough if this was coming from the Department of Homeland Security. They'd be legislating by bureaucratic fiat. But actually what they're doing is they're getting these state legislatures like North Carolina and Georgia to do this for them. It's kind of like when the government goes in, when the FBI goes into Google or to Apple, a third-party provider, and says, we would like to get the information that you're holding on David, for example. And they turn that over and they say, well, we don't need to have a search warrant because it's being freely given to us by someone who's given the data and is just holding it. Well, that's essentially what you're having happen here at the state levels. As opposed to being a check on the balance of the federal government, as opposed to standing up for our constitutional rights, these state legislatures in Georgia and North Carolina, I used to live in North Carolina, and I know that when it comes to identity card legislation, North Carolina just rolls over for anything the federal government wants to do, and that's what they're doing here, and they're doing it in Georgia as well. So be aware if that is happening in your state, and be aware of what the implications are when every time you get a job, it's reported to Washington. And presumably Washington has a say-so as to whether or not you get that job. They can say there's a problem with your paperwork, or you might run into some kind of a bureaucratic snafu like a no-fly list. You might get a no-work list as well. That's in the future. That takes us to our quote of the day. It is from Kwame Nkrumah, a former Marxist leader in Africa. But he had an interesting quote. He said, "A state in the grip of neocolonialism is not a master of its own destiny. It is this factor which makes neocolonialism such a serious threat to world peace." Now, what he's calling neocolonialism, we would call gangster capitalism, the kinds of things that Cecil Rhodes did in Rhodesia, the kinds of things that the large multinational banks are doing to us in the first world today. They were just seeing it at that time in the colonial world, the third world. They were seeing it, and it was very brutish, it was very open, it was very naked aggression. It was a little bit more subtle when they did it in the Western countries. But now the gloves have come off, and we're seeing that iron fist there. But we call it the difference between gangster capitalism and true free market, competitive free markets. That's not what capitalism is. It's not gangster capitalism. It is a free market where you have private property and true competition, and that is what is being squished out. Now, getting back to NSA spying information, Ars Technica has an article about how a 30-year-old, in this case a lawyer, exposed NSA mass surveillance of Americans. But it's not the 30-year-old Ed Snowden. No, this was a lawyer, and it was back in 1975, 8 years before Ed Snowden was born. And this was part of the Frank Church Committee hearings. If you remember, back in the mid-'70s, it was an effort to clean up corruption in the wake of Watergate. The article says, critics today charge that the U.S. surveillance state has become a self-perpetuating insular leviathan that essentially makes its own rules under minimal oversight. Absolutely. Well, the Church Committee, set up by Congress in 1975 to function as a sort of Watergate-style inquiry, focused on CIA subversion of foreign governments and spying on American citizens. Now, the 30-year-old lawyer that they talk about in this article is an L. Britt Snyder. And what he was talking about was Project Shamrock. Now, listen to how similar this is, even though the technology has changed. He said, I can remember the clean-cut, earnest man in his early 40s who met with me, but I do not recall his name. It was true, he said, that NSA had access for many years, even in 1975, to most of the international telegrams leaving New York City for foreign destinations. It was just telegrams then. The program was codenamed Shamrock, and it was known to only a few people within the government. Every day a courier went up to New York on the train and returned to Fort Meade, that's where the NSA was headquartered, with large reels of magnetic tape, which were copies of the international telegrams sent from New York the preceding day using the facilities of 3 telegraph companies. The tapes would then be electronically processed for items of foreign intelligence interest, typically telegrams sent by foreign establishments in the U.S., or telegrams that appeared to be encrypted. It's exactly what they are doing today. Except, as we'll see in the one article after this, we're going to see exactly how they're doing that from Google and Apple and how technology has streamlined that and made that so pervasive that they can do it to everyone. But first, let's take a look at the reaction in Germany. German prosecutors may actually file charges over U.S. and British surveillance. They're very angry about the fact that the German government has been spied upon. German Justice Minister Sabine Leuthauser Schnarrenberger demanded an immediate explanation and said the behavior of the intelligence services was, quote, reminiscent of the actions against enemies during the Cold War. Quote, it defies belief that our friends in the U.S. see Europeans as their enemies, she said. A spokesman for the federal prosecutor said the office was preparing to bring charges against, quote, persons unknown in relation to the reports. Well, we know who they are. They can start with James Clapper, Director of Intelligence, who lied to Congress just a couple of months before this was all broken by Snowden. He lied to Congress about what was being collected. We can also go to President Obama himself. Maybe they should press charges against Obama. But the interesting thing I think about it is the fact that they just cannot believe how they're being treated. They have no malice towards the United States. Yet the United States is treating them as if they're enemies. Well, that's the situation we American citizens find ourselves in. Not bearing any malice in general to the United States government, we are treated as if we were dangerous enemies. We are spied on, we are lied to, and we see a buildup in weapons reminiscent of the Cold War. So essentially what we see here is an information war, a PSYOP, that has all the hallmarks of a Cold War and preparations for a hot war. Now, the government likes to say that, like to minimize this NSA leak and say, we were just looking at ones and zeros, or it's just metadata. Well, more slides have been released today from The Independent, more slides from Edward Snowden, that give us more information about PRISM. And if you remember when this came out a couple of weeks ago now, the companies that were involved, Microsoft, Google, Apple, others, said essentially the same thing in their statements. They had very carefully worded, nearly identical statements of denial, which right there should tell you that they're not telling the truth, that they've got a prepared statement, carefully prepared denial, so they can kind of beat around the bush. Actually, I guess you'd say they're prevaricating around the bush. But these identical scripted statements were denials, and now we see in this document here that you're looking at, we see exactly what's happening. These are some more documents from this top secret slideshow that was leaked by Edward Snowden. The slide describes what happens when an NSA analyst, quote, tasks the PRISM system, in other words, gives it a task, for information about a new surveillance target. And they've got about 117,000 of these targets as of last count. The request to add a new target is passed automatically to a supervisor who reviews it. But basically, it's just a rubber stamp procedure because the analyst only has to have, in his terms, a reasonable belief defined as 51% confidence that the specified target is a foreign national. Now, the other things that are interesting are these side notes on these charts. Go down that chart just a little bit, and you'll see that side note over to the side. The Washington Post says, the FBI uses government equipment on private company property to retrieve matching information from a participating company, such as Microsoft or Yahoo, and it then passes it on without further notice or further review to the NSA. If you look at the next slide down, you'll see that it shows how it passes from the cloud to the FBI Data Intercept Technology Unit. That's the DITU. And it says in the notes there, from the FBI's interception unit on the premises of private companies. Again, they said, we don't know anything about it. We didn't have anything to do with it. They've actually got the machines there. And we've had leakers who have told us this in the past, and they were telling us this from the very beginning. And now we have more evidence from the government's own top secret slides that it is on the private company's premises that they put this specialized equipment where they can pass information to one or more quote-unquote customers, as they call themselves. Those customers would be the NSA, the CIA, or the FBI. Now, the next slide shows that depending on the provider, the NSA may receive live notifications when a target logs in or sends an email or monitors a voice text or voice chat as it is happening. So right there, there's the note right there. They're going to be pulling in the data in real time as it's happening. And if we look at the previous chart that was up there, one of the things that they like to talk about is how it's, go to the previous chart there, talk about metadata and how it's, don't worry, it's only metadata. Or as one congressman said, it's only ones and zeros, it's not any information about you. But on that chart, it shows not only metadata, but it shows voice content. Right there, you see voice content. Down a little bit to the left, guys, it says DNI content, in other words, where you're located, and videos. They're looking at all of your personal information. It is not just metadata. Now we have an interview that is coming up with the filmmakers of State of Mind, talking about control and how the government has absolute total control of us. Part of total control, part of the PSYOPs is having information about what you're doing, how you're going to react, how you think. Then they use that information to control you. This is an excellent documentary, State of Mind. It's going to be shipping July 17th. It is still pre-booking at Infowars. We're going to have it exclusively for a 90-day window here at Infowars. And we've got a video here where Alex is meeting with the filmmakers, and they talk about how subjective reality is manipulated to influence our objective reality.
Okay, folks, Alex Jones here with Infowars.com, and we're shooting some interviews to get the word out about the new film State of Mind, the Psychology of Control, that people can find out more about at Infowars.com and InfoWarsStore.com. And we're going to be premiering this on PrismPlanet.tv on July 17th. 7 o'clock Central for all the viewers and members of PrismPlanet.tv, and then they are graciously, to get the word out and have a free society, are going to allow it to be posted on our official YouTube channel for free for everybody. But I hope that folks out there will want to have it on Blu-ray or DVD and get a free film that we're offering with it at InfoWarsStore.com so that they can make future films. This is their second feature film. The first one, of course, is A Noble Lie, Oklahoma City, 1995, exposing that false flag. So this is very important to support the front lines of the InfoWar, and I'm very impressed with this film. That's why we have the initial distribution the first 3 months of it coming out. So you can pre-order it right now at InfoWarsStore.com. But we were in here having a meeting about a big interview we're doing tomorrow on the Nightly News, and Richard Grove, who is a forensic historian and really knows his stuff because I've done a lot of research. And hearing him talk, the way he puts things is really a great way to wake people up, but also to simplify the complexity. And he's basically taken the classic equation, one of the classic equations of Einstein, and combined it to basically explain how they're hijacking the human computer and manipulating it, why they want us to have training instead of real education. Of course, they call their brainwashing and Pavlovian training, they call it education, but it's really dog training, TSA, all of it. So I got him to basically agree to talk to us here and go back over what he was showing me earlier when he drew out this equation. So Richard, please break this down for everybody out there.
Just a little behind the scenes on what it takes to come up with state of mind and the line of thinking that it takes for an individual to become autonomous again. You've heard the saying, Temet Noske, know thyself. It comes from the Greek oracle Delphi. They used to go to a woman who would sniff vapors because they didn't have logic and reason yet. And when logic and reason came along, the oracle of Delphi became obsolete. So movies like The Matrix say that this whole place, these are arguments of philosophy. How do you find reality? How do you find knowledge? How do you find wisdom and pass it on? Well, one of the pieces of wisdom we have as humanity is the idea of energy mass equivalence. It didn't originate with Einstein, it originated with Maxwell. But if you take this equation, which basically means 1 gram of any substance, any element on Earth, has the same potential energy, and you solve it for celeritas, or the speed of light, you find that it has both positive and negative values. Now this is the same that if you had the square root of 4, you would also have plus or minus 2. So you have a positive and negative aspect. The positive aspect, which would be on the bottom, would be your physical or objective reality. This is where we use words particulars. If I say chair, I mean this chair, not the concept or universal of all chairs, right? And so we as human beings have to interact with reality, but most of our human beingness comes from our mind. So this is where we keep knowledge, these universal concepts. This is subjective experience.
That's the archetypes they're programming.
Right, absolutely. And you also have to synchronize yourself to stay in line with reality. So the objective reality, or these particulars, you need a way to
test it.
To test it, to synchronize it, just like you synchronize your devices, right? So when you're dealing with objective reality and you want to get to, what is the concept or what is the knowledge to be learned, use deductive logic. And when you want to go from the concept that you've learned and take it back to reality, you use the other part of the convection current called inductive logic. So really, it's the war on in your mind. It's not a war going on out there. It's the fact that we don't understand ourselves, and our opponents have spent a great deal of money and wealth understanding us better than we have gained knowledge of ourselves at this point. Now, the education system plays into it because it behooves corporate society for people not to be able to synchronize. They want to control your ideas up here, and they don't want you to use your 5 senses and observe down here. And it's through observation, identification, organization, and then communication that we can find valid knowledge and express it to other people as wisdom.
So that's why they say questioning known liars is a conspiracy theory. That's just a fake archetype up in the universal to say don't look at your 5 senses. That's kooky. So basically they're trying to get people to just stay in the allegory of the cave and only believe what's projected on the wall. We're back to Plato again.
And one of the challenges as a media producer is to create a piece of media that takes the audience through that transition, through that learning process, so that they can escape the cave, the metaphor, of being an enslaved person in their mind because they don't ask questions. Recently, the kids at RIT, Rochester Institute of Technology in upstate New York, had a $12,000 Kickstarter to build a 3-dimensional model of the Escherian steps, M.C. Escher being a famous model who made 2D designs that looked like 3D. So the challenge was build this in reality. And a viral video went across the internet where you can see people running up and down these Escherian steps having their minds blown. And I advise everyone who's watching to take a look at that, look it up, and don't do research into how they do it. Just experience the PSYOP as it is and see if you can figure it out without looking it up. But what you'll see is that their project was not to create some impossible 3-dimensional staircase. It was to sell a myth to the public. It was to raise money to make people believe that they were really going to do it. They use a vertical split screen. I spoiled it for everybody. We'll have to cut.
No, just spoil it.
They use a vertical split screen so other people can basically take their iPhone, go to this stairwell, which really exists, but it's a real stairwell that only goes, one way and you can't go around in circles. And then they can simply edit it. And the phenomenon you experience is that when these kids figure out it's a myth, they don't tell you. They participate in it. And so that's the teaching of psychological warfare skills to college students, and I'm sure that's not what their parents are paying for, but it's a priceless lesson because I was able to share this with my friends and family, and they have all sorts of ideas about how it's done, and when I tell them it's psychological warfare, when I explain it's a myth that they're creating, they take a step back. And I'm like, that's just what they did on 9/11. It's what they do on every
And that's why they
situation.
teach you about things like, Christmas really being Santa Claus, and you lie to your kids and be part of the myth.
Right, and that's part of social conditioning. I mean, I know it's a gross topic, but there's a really great documentary on circumcision and how that brutal practice came into this country. And when you find out it's about breaking down the male in the family and social control, and if a father will do that to his only child or firstborn son, then society can really control that father to do anything, can't they?
Absolutely. They can make you engage in sexual mutilation, then you'll accept anything else. If you can let the TSA stick their hands down your pants, then you'll accept anything. If you'll let them take blood at warrantless checkpoints, you'll do anything.
Predictive programming. Predictive programming. And so it's the use of cybernetics and technology to harness human spirits, which are subjective. They are universals. They use technology in the real world to try to take away our humanity. They have to dehumanize other people on the other side of the world for us to say, rah, rah, send that money to buy jets and bomb them or use drones. And people in America have to believe that those people on the other side of the world who might not look like us are bad people, that they're not human beings because they want to use depleted uranium and white phosphorus and all these crazy things that our tax dollars unwittingly, I mean, none of us really agree to that. And yet
well, that's like man-made global warming.
Right.
Undoubtedly, some of the things we do to the earth are hurting the earth and us, but it's certainly not carbon dioxide. But they say, Obama yesterday, the bad weather was because you didn't pay the UN money. And it's going back to the ancient myths of give me the best hut, give me the best food, let me sacrifice your children, or the snake god's going to eat the moon tomorrow. The scientists knew that it was really an eclipse. They knew it came back. But they knew the general public didn't mark down the dates, didn't remember, so they thought the priests were magic, and now they've come back to accept world government. Let us charge you more for everything. Let us make you pay private interest, a global tax of $100 trillion over the next decade, as they're calling for at Davos, or the earth will basically die, while they actually engage in things that are hurting the earth. And that becomes the real delusion. When you study these globalists, they're the ones that are actually endangering everything, and they're drinking their own Kool-Aid as well.
They're not only drinking their own Kool-Aid, but they fail to recognize the fact that they are drinking Kool-Aid. And the things that are going on right now are not new. It's just that we're at a point in history where we can afford the technology to easily share this with millions of people. And times in the past, you could tell a couple people and then they'll probably wipe you out, take all your stuff, and never be heard from again because they write history. So you're really dealing with a well-organized opponent with a lot of office supplies that keep records back thousands of years. We have a very short memory in this country. People in Europe aren't so easily controlled so much because they've been part of a system that's been controlled. We were groomed to think that we live in a free country. That has not been true for a long time, but it could be true again. These ideas that made America great are still here. They've just been conditioned out of us. They've bred the liberty, self-reliance, self-confidence, and freedom out of us. And they've taught us to externalize all these things through conspicuous consumption. Buy a fancy car, get respect from people. Have a high-paying job, get respect from people. Well, those are some of the things that I had trouble with when I left the corporate world. When I retired as a whistleblower, I got to give up my big apartment, my Range Rover, my Porsche. I haven't had a car, a cell phone, a bank card in 10 years. I'm just fine. The clothes I'm wearing, this jacket I bought in 1997, it's still fine. You have to look at world affairs and yourself and how you interact with.
Well, integrity is the value,
exactly,
not the signets of success. Again, that's all just surface or universal programming instead of what real value is.
Well, and one of the differences today with universal programming is this idea of cybernetics. Zbigniew Brzezinski in Between Two Ages, the Technotronic Era, which means the post-industrial world in America, he says that the deindustrialization of America is planned because they had this thing called cybernetics where they could collect all this information. And under the Soviet Union, it wasn't as effective because they had no computing power to process it and make profiles and predict people's behavior. But today, everything that's going on with the NSA spying is stuff that Brzezinski called for in 1970 to say, if you want to control this human livestock, you have to start collecting massive amounts of information and applying and developing technological artificial intelligence to do something with that to control their attention and make sure that no one's
and damage us so we can be better managed, which is a crime against the species and everyone, and shows how degenerate these people are. It's not like they're lions going out eating gazelles because that's the order of things. They are wrecking the species to make us gazelles so they can act like lions when they're not even really lions. They are people that on a mass scale are cheating themselves and everyone else. And that's why it's important that the fire of liberty get out there across the entire world. And that's why films like State of Mind are important. I hope you get it at InfoWarsStore.com. I hope you start thinking for yourself because these people are laughing at you. So many folks that learn about this knowledge decide to use it to manipulate people so that they can, again, have more empty logos of power, a bigger house, a nicer car. When in truth, if you have this knowledge and use it for good to empower people, you can become monetarily successful. But then you realize that's only a tool or fuel to try to build a better civilization, because that's the real continuum we're part of, is trying to be a healthy species in a future, not one run by a bunch of crazy technocrats. And so I just hope that everybody out there understands that I've been approached many times off record, but also sometimes on record, and they say, look, the public scum, you're smart, you see it, join us. That's what they tell a lot of these people, and then on the ego they go, oh, I can be part of the club, and it's all just a sick narcissistic joke, ladies and gentlemen. The people in the greatest depths of the matrix are those that think they're going to manage and control all of this. And so that's the point I want to make to you out there, is that this knowledge is a fact. What's going on with the New World Order is a spoken fact. They write books like Brzezinski. I've read a couple of his books where he brags about all this evil and admits they run the organized crime and admits they are managing everything. And you've got to understand that Rothkopf writes and talks about this. All their insiders think you're so stupid, they write books just for themselves to read it, kind of like Carol Quigley wrote Tragedy and Hope, just to give to people at the State Department so they can understand, wait, we're fascist, but we run communism? Well, wait, we want authoritarianism? Well, wait. They themselves have to have these publications so they can understand the twisted logic.
And then if you look at who attacks you, Rachel Maddow is a Rhodes Scholar. MSNBC is owned by GE, and they produce nuclear weapons. They're every part of the New World Order. So when a Rhodes Scholar is attacking you on a regular basis, I'd say you're successful.
Well, you notice she likes to play the part of an anti-tyrant person when Bush was in, but you notice that Naomi Wolf has come out against Snowden and says, I feel like he might be a double agent.
Wolf is a Rhodes Scholar as well.
I know, that's why I brought her up.
Yeah. So
and it's regardless of who Snowden really is. He didn't give out missile secrets or aircraft carrier speeds. He said what we already knew, but just said that, and now they're talking about wanting him dead. And saying arrest him, and then all these people are saying he might be an agent or something because the media is spinning it. They're going to do that anyways. Yeah. Justice be done, may the heavens fall. But you can see all these people who just think they're smarter than us trying to manage us.
And they're intellectually bankrupt. That's the most important point to take away. Review anything, the attack pieces that corporate media does on Alex. They can never address the reasonable points that are being made, the legitimate documents that are out there. They always have to go after something and go get some video of him from 10 years ago, make it look like he's in this little tiny studio. They do not give him respect as they should because they know it's a threat. Well,
she lies and says that I'm saying there's WASP under the UN, or that Obama sent the tornado when a lady said, are there weather weapons? And I said, of course there are. I don't think this is a weather weapon. That turns into I said Obama did it. But that's desperateness. Right. I mean, they are desperate.
Right. And if anyone wants to look it up, weather weapons, December 10th, 1976, there's a United Nations treaty against weather weapons, weather modification banned in that treaty. So the United Nations knows it exists. We should too.
It was a giant geoengineering program. But again, State of Mind, support free open film. Get this out to everybody. And regardless, watch it on the 17th. And then later it's going to be on YouTube. And understand this is a gift for all of our future. So again, Alex Jones signing off here with the great folks from Free Minds Films. Now get out there and take on the New World Order, because there is a war on for your mind. And knowing about it is half the battle.
Well, we're going to end our news tonight with two positive stories. You may recall that Hobby Lobby was being pressured by the Obama administration into providing abortion health care for its employees. They refused on religious grounds, and the government came against them with $1.3 million per day fines. Now, they had a victory in court today. In a story from the New American, it says, Hobby Lobby wins reprieve in battle against contraceptive mandate. On June 27th, the 10th Circuit Court of Appeals in Denver ruled that the Christian owners of Hobby Lobby and Mardel had sufficiently demonstrated that they would likely prevail in proving that their religious freedoms would be compromised if they were forced to obey the mandate. The ruling reversed a lower court's refusal to provide a preliminary injunction blocking enforcement of the mandate while the Hobby Lobby case proceeds in court. CEO David Green explained that, quote, by being required to make a choice between sacrificing our faith or paying millions of dollars in fines, we essentially must choose which poison pill to swallow. We simply cannot abandon our religious beliefs to comply with this mandate. Now, this latest court ruling means that while the case proceeds, Hobby Lobby and Mardel will not be subject to the estimated $1.3 million per day in fines that would have been imposed on them as of July 1st for their refusal to obey the mandate. The companies, founded by Green and family as biblically based businesses, have combined a total of some 14,000 full-time employees eligible for company-provided health insurance. You have to understand that to the Obama administration, to the socialists who are trying to saddle us with these kind of mandates, that's worth these 14,000 employees losing their job, putting this business out of business so they can dictate the terms of health care being provided. Absolutely amazing, but nothing matters to them more than their ability to dictate terms to people. It truly is the heart of a dictator, and they do not care about people's lives or about the economy. We should have other exemptions, not just for religious exemptions. No one should be forced to have mandated health care. That is something that the government clearly does not have the authority to do under the Constitution. Well, we also have another interesting victory here, or potential victory. At least they're moving in the right way. We have a Tea Party freshman that is putting the D.C. speed cameras in the crosshairs, reports Roll Call. Now, of course, this isn't something that has happened yet, and he only has 2 co-sponsors. But listen to what, it's kind of a snarky article here from David Hawkins, but it's kind of interesting. He says, House Republicans have shown their interest in micromanaging the municipal affairs of Washington, D.C. time and again. He says usually it's social experiments, things like charter schools, gun control, abortion rights, medical marijuana, needle exchange programs for drug addicts. But this time, Representative Carrie Bentivolio, a conservative freshman from outer Detroit suburbs, is trying to stop traffic speed cameras. Now, he says, at first blush, seeking a federal rewrite of one local traffic ordinance would seem about the farthest thing one would imagine from a small government conservatism. Why would that be? Why wouldn't small government want to stop these kinds of speed tickets? Well, I don't know why he thinks that would be a contradiction, but it is not something that you would expect from Republicans, okay? Maybe Republicans don't really want small government, but libertarians do. And that was the interesting thing about this. He says that this is representative of a libertarian streak that is showing up in the House Republican Conference. Says these members say the cameras are a pernicious Big Brother intrusion into everyday life that could lead to improper government snooping into our lives and already guarantee a lack of due process for motorists. And there has been legislation to restrict their use enacted in a dozen states. He also points out that he's got 2 co-sponsors, Steve Stockman of Texas and David Schweikert of Arizona. Well, hats off to those 3, I guess, as the Australians would say, good on you. We really appreciate them taking a look at an issue like that. It is not a trivial issue. It is not micromanaging. It is something we should all be concerned about. Well, stay tuned. Right after the break, we have that interview we talked about with Mike Zullo, talking about Obama's birth certificate and how he's trying to cover up his background. Stay tuned. Now you can watch the Infowars Nightly News streaming live as it happens for free.
Check it out at Infowars.com/show.
Johnny Appleseed was born during the Revolutionary War. He's not just a legend. And in more than 5 states, he introduced apples that had not even been grown in the colonies. Later, the seeds from plants he planted and cultivated and some of the varieties he developed spread across the United States. And it was Johnny Appleseed teaching the colonists and then the new Americans, after we won independence, the love of planting fruit trees that introduced that idea to North America. Ladies and gentlemen, it is a revolutionary act to unplug from the television, to unplug from the computer and all the globalist propaganda, and to go out in your backyard or your front yard or planters at your apartment or on the roof of the building where you live, and to plant a garden.
Become the Johnny Appleseed of your community with seeds from the Infowars Seed Center at InfoWarsStore.com.
The simple act of planting fruits and vegetables and then tending them and taking care of them and then sharing them with friends and family is a revolutionary act against tyranny. The globalists, first and foremost, do not want us to be self-sufficient. The crony anti-free market capitalist, the fascist, are using socialism and collectivism to shut down societies. Stalin in Poland and in Ukraine and other areas starved on record more than 10 million people over 5 years by not letting them grow their own crops and collectivizing them. Mao killed between 65 million and 80+ million people doing this same thing. The UN says they will use food as a weapon. They use genetic evil to attack the earth, and major GMO companies have been caught going into growth belts around the world, even where GMO is illegal, and planting seeds everywhere to infect the genetics of the original crops. Almost all of the thousands of varieties of Mexican corn has been infected. They are in a genetic war against everyone. That's why we have to get these seeds and not just plant them on our own gardens and not just give them as gifts to friends and family to plant spring and summer and fall gardens. I'm calling on you to go out into the green belts, to go out into the areas and plant secret gardens. No, not of marijuana, but of the hundreds and hundreds of incredible high-quality vegetables and herbs and fruit plants that are here. Lemons and oranges, the list goes on and on. They will grow, plum trees, grape trees, they will grow almost everywhere in the U.S. We can literally, not just buying these products from InfoWarsStore.com, but from wherever you get them. This aggressive program literally just came to me one morning when I woke up about 4 a.m. realizing that we've got to counter their genetic war against us with original, real crops developed over eons on this planet. We have the lowest prices. We bought it in the biggest bulk that some of these companies have ever seen to ship this directly to you from the InfoWars Command Center. We stand for life. We stand for liberty. We stand for self-sufficiency. Go to InfoWarsStore.com, click on the Seed Center, and as of taping this, we have the 7 top respected brands. We intend to continue to do research and find other companies, other specialties, other varieties to really take action.
The Infowars Store Seed Center has the largest online selection of heirloom, non-GMO seeds.
Check out these products from our newest supplier, Heirloom Organics.
The Medicine Garden for a natural remedy.
The Tea Garden that contains every important tea herb you can grow.
Fruit Lovers with 12 varieties.
And the Tobacco Pack, additive and pesticide free.
Join the gardening revolution today at InfoWarsStore.com.
This is a revolutionary action we're asking you to take. Plant seeds everywhere today. Nurture them, bring them to fruit, and pass on the knowledge to others. Become human again. Discover your roots in the soil. And remember, the revolution against tyranny is growing.
Well, we know that President Obama wants background checks for all gun owners. And as we mentioned earlier in the program, the government now wants background checks before you get a job. But there's one background they don't want to check, and that's President Obama's. And we have with us today a lead investigator into President Obama's background. We have Mike Zullo. He is a lead investigator for Sheriff Arpaio's cold case posse. And they have some new developments in looking at President Obama's birth certificate. Mike, welcome.
Hey, thank you for having me today.
Now, you've got a lot of experience as an investigator in New Jersey. Tell us a little bit about your background before we get into looking at Obama's background, his documents.
I'm a former New Jersey police officer, police detective. I'm a New Jersey police certified investigator. I've been trained in fingerprint identification, narcotics investigation, domestic violence investigation. I was trained in surveillance techniques and counter-surveillance techniques. I've been MCSO, Maricopa County Sheriff's Office, trained in investigation and interview techniques, high-risk criminal detection and felony apprehension. I have received AZ Post certified training in both homicide investigation and cold case homicide investigation. And I am currently the commander of the Maricopa County Sheriff's Office Cold Case Posse under the direction of Sheriff Joe Arpaio. I am his chief investigational officer on the eligibility investigation of Barack Obama's long-form birth certificate.
Now, you went to Hawaii as part of this investigation, is that correct? And looked at, tried to get some original documents. Tell us a little bit about that.
Actually went there twice. We did go there the very first time to interview Mr. Alvin Onaka. He's a state registrar from the state of Hawaii. On the bottom of that PDF image, Mr. Onaka's signature appears with a certification stamp certifying the authenticity of that PDF image. Much to our surprise, Mr. Onaka refused to interview with us. He actually said that he doesn't take an interview with the public. Subsequent to that, we persisted and instructed his staff that we were the police, not just the general public, and that we needed to speak to someone. They sent forth a deputy attorney general by the name of Jill Nagamini. After a little coercing, we did get about a 20-minute interview with her, and she painfully took us through the process of why everything we were asking could not be produced because, according to her, we would be violating Hawaii state law in asking for a verification of a document. The one thing that became apparent to us in the questions that were asked was, in no way did the state of Hawaii release a PDF file. In no way did they certify a PDF file. As a matter of fact, they made it very clear that they really had nothing to do with that. Once they issued a long-form birth certificate, anyone who got that certificate was free to do whatever they wanted to do with it.
Well, that's interesting because I have background with Photoshop, and you referred to it as a PDF file. I mean, you would expect that if this didn't come from Hawaii or some official office, well, even if it did, you would expect it to be a flattened document. But this document had layers. This document that was provided by, I guess it was the White House that provided this?
My understanding is it was provided by the White House. It was on the whitehouse.gov server, produced for the world to see, the state of Arizona and every state in the nation, and proffered as proof positive of the birth event. The only problem we have with that is that PDF image, because of that layering, we do believe is not an original image, not a certified image. It has been built entirely by human intervention. It was compiled for one purpose and one purpose only, and that was to deceive the unsuspecting public. Yeah,
you know, I remember when George Bush was running, I believe it was for re-election, and Dan Rather had this document that purported to be from a letter from the Bush family or something to a National Guard person, but it was obviously a forgery because this letter was supposedly written back in the 60s, but it had proportionally spaced typing. It had, you know, they put in a date that's like the 15th or something, and it put like the little upper superscript TH there, which you would never get off of a typewriter at that time. So it was clearly a modern-looking document, and there was a lot of issues that were anachronisms. There was differences in the typeface on this as well, right? As well as some content issues. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, we have the typeset issues, although we don't believe the typeset issues are from an original document. And here's where they are purposely confusing the public. This is not an original document. What we have here is an original forgery. This never started its life as a paper document. So we do have typeset anomalies on here that we believe were perpetrated by a cut and paste method of moving around individual letters. We have evidence that the state register stamp, numerous date stamps, have been imported into the document from different source documents. Hence, you get those 9 layers that we were referring to. You have specific information contained on each and every one of those layers, including the layer 9, which is the green safety paper background. And aside from all the other anomalies and everything else imported into that document, the only reason why you would manufacture a green safety paper background is for one specific intent: to deceive the unsuspecting public's untrained eye that this thing looks authentic. There is just no way that a computer automated process could create the number of anomalies found in Obama's PDF file.
Absolutely, yeah. It looks like a very poorly done forgery. Tell us a little bit about this affidavit that's just recently come out. It did recently come out, is that correct?
Is that the affidavit that I submitted, or our experts report? The affidavit I submitted was to the Supreme Court in Alabama. I was requested by Attorney Larry Klayman if I would help him out and submit an affidavit. Apparently, in that court situation, the Alabama Democratic Party submitted an amicus brief, and Mr. Klayman was looking for a rebuttal document and asked me to provide it. That document is a pretty good overview of where we stand on the Obama document. That document actually reads as almost like an indictment, if you will, of the document. As a matter of fact, I could have, at one point I'll send you a copy of it. You could post it on your site if you like it. It's good for people to read that.
Yeah, no, I absolutely would. Tell us about the other affidavit, too, that was by the expert.
We were fortunate, if not blessed, in a sense. We had a gentleman try about 212 forensic document examiners, trying to get someone that would take a look at this document for us, verify our work, our findings, and come to his own independent conclusion. We were fortunate in finally securing a gentleman by the name of Reed Hayes, a certified forensic document examiner, who did just that. A little reluctantly in the beginning, he did take a look at the document for me. When I convinced him to at least take a cursory look at the file, I sent him the original PDF file that was pulled down off the White House website. And in about, I got to say, about 20 minutes, he did contact me back and did tell me there was something wrong with it. There were many things wrong with it. I then asked him if he would indeed look at it and help us, and he said he would. About 2 weeks later, I got a 40-page report back from Mr. Hayes, and in his conclusion, he comes right forth and says that in all his years, 20 years of experience, looking at all kinds of documents, he has never seen a document so fatally flawed as this, and that the document, in his opinion, is a 100% fabrication. Now, this is a court-recognized forensic document examiner, has testified in numerous court cases, and as fate would have it, he even testified on behalf of Perkins Coie. Perkins Coie is the law firm that represents Mr. Obama in all eligibility issues, and is actually the same law firm that dispatched a lawyer to pick up the purported 2 certified copies of Mr. Obama's birth certificate.
Wow. Now, there were some computer simulations as a part of that affidavit, weren't there?
Yes, there were. There's some...
Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, there were screenshots in that affidavit of some of the work that we did. Now, if you're talking about the affidavit, or are you talking about his report?
Well, his report. Just tell us a little bit about the computer simulations.
Well, I can't go into too much about his report. His report is confidential. I've only released that last comment that he made because that really sums it up. Okay.
All right. Fine. Now, there were some things that really were things, like I said, that people could see even if they weren't document experts. The multiple layers was very suspicious. There were other things, too, like the fact that it referred to his race as African American. That was very anachronistic, wasn't it?
Yes, it was. Our research says that the term African, number one, is not a race identifier. Number two, the term African to describe a race, if you will, was not used for about 20 years in the future. It was actually around the early 80s.
Right.
It was used. So we have no documentation that says African means anything like that. The other problem you have with that is African doesn't describe a white individual. It doesn't describe a black individual. It doesn't describe an Asian individual. It is not a race identifier. So whoever compiled the document for whatever purpose used African as the race identifier, and that was incorrect by the 1961 Vital Statistics Standards. That term for a person of color back then would have been Negro, and should have appeared as Negro in that field, not African.
Right. And people can verify this for themselves if they just Google this. All you have to do is look up the terms and see when African American began to be used. As you said, it wasn't even talked about really until the late 60s, 6 or 7 years after Obama was born. Up until that point, Negro and colored were used, and you can find articles, a 1967 Ebony article that talks about black versus African American. You can find a Slate report that talks about the term Negro started its decline in 1966 and was totally uncouth by the mid-1980s. So to put something like that in is another one of these anachronisms, like I said, like the typefaces and the George Bush letter, the superscript TH, things that are modern that they tried to put in a document that would be 40, 50, 60 years old.
Well, that's correct. And, this document, as Mr. Hayes pointed out, is so fatally flawed. You only need one item to put a document into question.
That's right. That's right.
But the biggest problem with this document is you could never take this PDF file, enter it into a courtroom, put it before a judge, and have a judge declare it authentic. It's impossible to do. Hawaii statutes do not provide for them to create a PDF file. It's just something that didn't come out of the state of Hawaii. That turns this into a felony. The production of this document is a felony. The possession of the document is a felony. Proffering it to people for gain is a felony. And gain being the presidential race for 2012, I believe this was released a little bit before. And there's a gain of $450,000 a year to be the president of the United States. So there's a financial aspect, compiled with this. So the document we know is not real. You cannot use that document to get a Social Security card. You couldn't use it to get a utility bill. You couldn't bring it into a courtroom. Effectively, the American people have been shown nothing relating to that birth event. And the bigger problem we have is we have no verifiable information of Mr. Obama being in the state of Hawaii before the age of 5 years old. Cannot locate anyone to come forward and say they knew Stanley Ann Dunham is pregnant. They've seen her pregnant. They took her to a hospital. Nothing. We have little instances of people saying afterwards they saw the child, but nothing before 5 years old.
Well, it's not limited just to this. I mean, we see so many things coming from the Obama administration. We see the Benghazi issues. We see the IRS issues. We see so many cases where you've got officials of the Obama administration caught lying under oath. And yet, we can't look at, they're grabbing everyone's phone records at Homeland Security, and yet he's got all of his personal records sealed. His travel records, his early records, his college records, everything is sealed for this president. There's absolutely no transparency for him personally and no transparency for the administration. So given the fact that we've got Fast and Furious and we've got the IRS scandals, we've got wiretapping scandals that are magnitudes far greater than we saw with Richard Nixon when he was impeached. A lot of the same issues that Richard Nixon had. We've got illegal wars, undeclared wars. We've got, beyond that, we've got assassination drone lists that he's doing. What is the chance of any of this stuff coming together, and how does your investigation wrap up and play into this? Do you think you have a better chance of exposing his criminal actions in the birth certificate forgery than we have in some of these other scandals?
Well, I think these other scandals, obviously, in severity outweigh the production of a document. However, if Congress had done their job as early as the complaints were coming in, and by the way, Alex Jones was the first video I ever saw in this document when I was assigned this case. I did a little, cruising around the internet and saw Alex taking it apart. If that was paid mind to then, maybe these other instances of outrageous violations against American people would never have happened.
Absolutely.
We are trying, Sheriff Arpaio has maintained that this really needs to get the attention of Congress. I agree with him wholeheartedly, and we are proceeding in that venue. We do have indication that Congressman Steve Stockman from Texas is very interested, and we are trying to coordinate a meeting where I can fully debrief Mr. Stockman as to what has been going on here.
Great. If we go back and we look at the Nixon impeachment, it wasn't a single thing. It was an overreaching pattern of behavior. And that's what we see with the Obama administration, too. We see not only the wiretapping and the FBI coming after people, illegal wars, the IRS used as a weapon against political enemies. we also see the same types of things in terms of lying and changing documents that we saw under the Nixon administration. So I guess from your perspective then, if we can wrap all these together into multiple sections, that might have some weight. You think that maybe Steve Stockman, maybe some other congressman might be able to have the guts to stand up and do that?
I'm hoping so. I think Steve Stockman has what it takes, and I'm hoping there's going to be others to support him. You know, going forward with this is something that has to be dealt with, though. The American people have a right to know who their president is.
That's right.
We have a background check or an investigation going on that we can't tell you who the man is. And it's the only sitting president I know of that has 4 aliases.
Mm-hmm.
You know, 4 AKAs, goes by different names. I can't put him in certain places that he claims to be in his background. He could not pass a background investigation to become a deputy sheriff. He couldn't pass it for our government, to be really candid with you.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
And we learned that the government does not vet a presidential candidate, nor do they vet a president-elect or the sitting president.
Well, it's a pattern of behavior that we see over and over again. Our lives are to be open books to the government, and yet you have a situation like the Bilderberg conventions that they have, meetings that they have, and we're not allowed to know what's being told there. We're not even allowed to know for sure who's there. No notes are taken. No public is allowed anywhere near the place. So we have the people at the very top of the system that maintain that they are to have absolute privacy and secrecy, and we better not look into what they're doing, and yet they expect to have an insight into every aspect of our life. No detail is to be left hidden to them.
Well, you know, it's really good when you put those kind of laws and regulations in place when you're the one administering them and not on the receiving end of them.
That's right.
And, you know, Alex has been talking about this, and, you know, and I have to tell you, I didn't know Alex Jones until this started. And in the very beginning, I would hear some of the things he would say, and he was always saying something. He goes, "Don't believe me, do your own research." Mm-hmm. Well, I actually took Alex up on a number of those things, and to my amazement, the information that he was talking about, I actually could find.
Yeah, absolutely.
And, I mean, he's doing a service, and my hat is off to him. I know he takes a lot of shots, and, you know, I just hope he's real careful. You need to be really careful in this game.
Well, as you know, when you come up with something that the mainstream media is not covering and nobody is talking about it, the first reaction is going to be, "Are you crazy? I don't hear this from anybody else." So just as you're having to carefully document your investigation with all the details and get expert testimony, you have to very carefully document this because you're one of the few people covering it. And we have to do that all the time. If we come out with some news that nobody else is covering, we have to link to the documents. And so, as you said, hopefully people will take a look at this. I'd like for you to send us that document that you referenced earlier, and we'll put that up along with this interview on the website, and people can look at that and investigate it for themselves. But as we said before, certain things like the fact that it's a layered document, the fact that they use a term that would not be used at the time to describe his race, those things are easily verified by people who just do their own Google search. I just typed in when African American became a popular term to be used, and I found multiple documents that would support that from a lot of different sources. So people can do their own investigation on some of these things, and as you pointed out, you don't need to catch but just one mistake like that that's fraudulent in a document to prove that it's false. But you've got a lot of different areas there, so it is riddled with issues. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much for talking to us, and certainly hope that you can get some traction on this, that you can get a congressman to stand up and actually file articles of impeachment, because this is a serious issue. It's a serious issue when his administration lies before Congress about what they're doing, but this is also yet another case that should be looked at. Thank you very much, Mike.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Well, if you want to stay current on investigations about this and the seemingly endless list of scandals coming out of the Obama administration and criminal activity, get a subscription to Prison Planet TV if you're watching this on YouTube. Just one subscription gives 10 people besides yourself access to Prison Planet TV simultaneously. It helps to support our operation, and it helps to wake people up and keep them informed. Well, that's it for tonight. We'll be back tomorrow at 7 Central, 8 p.m. Eastern.
Now you can watch The Alex Jones Show live as it happens at Infowars.com/show.
You'll find links to all of our content there and a free 15-day trial for Prison Planet TV.
More than 60 movies and documentaries all in one place at Infowars.com/show.